Hi everyone, Happy New Year. So what you're about to see here is a video that was supposed to go out on New Year's Eve, and then there was a problem with some of the footage at the end of the video. So I'm having to reshoot. So you will see me dressed differently in different light during portions of this video. My apologies to you, but I still thought the video was worth saving because it's a little bit of a look back at 2024 and a little peek into what might be happening in 2025. So hope you guys are having a great day. Here's the video. Hey everyone, Erin the Impatient Gardener here. We are at the end of another gardening year. Actually, I think we've been at the end of the gardening year for a little bit yet, but we're definitely at the end of a year. And as I have done most years, thought we'd take a little look back at what this year in the garden was like around here. This was a weird gardening year, but I'll bet you any money I say that almost every year. But this was definitely a year full of highs and lows in the garden. Just really great points and not such great points. This year was also a little unusual for me because unlike most years, I didn't have one really big project that I had been planning for and working on. This was really a year for me to refine the garden, correct previous year's mistakes, improve some things, finish up some areas that I hadn't really paid much attention to. I kind of went into this year thinking like, this is the year I want to like do the actual gardening bit, like move plants around and divide things and make new plants and fill in areas. And so there was a lot of little projects that led up to that, but no big, huge project that took up a lot of time, effort, and also money. So I mentioned correcting mistakes. So it's a little funny that I'm going to start by telling you about one of the mistakes I made right off from the get-go this year. One of the first projects I really did when I was able to get out and start working in the garden. And that came when I was potting or repotting the Little Boss clematis that I have growing in the vegetable garden that flank the gate. They grow in two 24-inch square pots, and they've been there for, I would have said in that video, but I think it was probably 4 years, 3 years, something like that. So I needed to repot those because the soil level in those pots had sunk quite a bit year after year after year, so they were quite low in their pots. And also it had been a while since I'd been in there, so I thought, we better get in here to see what's happening. So that turned into just a nightmare project because what I did not expect was that those clematis fully took up that whole pot. It was so hard. I mean, I worked on that for an entire day trying to get those things out of those pots. It was miserable because they were so jammed in there. I succeeded without too much trauma. I mean, obviously there was trauma to the plants a little bit, but without too much trauma to the plants, I think a lot of trauma to me. I succeeded in getting those out. I put in nice fresh soil, put that all back in those pots, potted them up, and showed you what I had done. And then many people in the comments said, well, first of all, this is just going to happen again. Well, actually, let me back up with the comments. First of all, there's a lot of questions, and apparently I did a lousy job explaining why those were growing in pots to begin with and not in the ground. Apparently I just skipped over that. I think perhaps I was assuming people had seen the planting video from years before. I should never assume that. Long story short, I like them in pots, and that's why they grow in pots, because I want them raised up on either side of that door. And I also like to be able to fill in that area with some annuals as well. But the other comment that I got was, why didn't you do the bunny Guinness trick of cutting off the bottom of the pot and letting those roots grow into the soil? And the answer is because I'm silly and maybe a little dumb, and I totally forgot about that trick because it was the perfect application for that. So that garden is, I've got a layer of basically like ground up road base and then gravel on top of that. But there is soil underneath those, and I could certainly scrape away the gravel and the road base underneath those pots and do exactly that. In fact, what's funny is that I actually have to go to lengths to keep plants in those pots because those pots have slatted bottoms on them. So I actually use a piece of foam board insulation with holes poked through it for drainage. as like false bottoms in those pots. So I actually had to create a bottom. I could have not done that and just put those straight on the bottom, not even worried about those wood slats, and the roots would have gone through. Oops. So probably the good news is they're in pots. I can still do that. There's no reason why I can't lift those pots up this spring, clear that out, and put that directly on the ground and let those clematis grow straight into the ground. And honestly, I probably will do that. Anyway, kicked off the year with a bit of a mistake that I get to correct this year. So spring last year, well, first of all, the weather last year in general was crazy. And I feel like probably every recap video I do from now until the end of time will now say that, because it's always going to be weird from here on out. There is no normal anymore. However, last winter we had the warmest winter, I think, ever on record, with the least amount of snow. In fact, we got about 3 inches of snow on Halloween last season, and that was the most snow we got at one time all year long. We had hardly any snow. We barely, I mean, it was so warm all year, which was great for plants, excellent for people, unless you were wanting to do winter sports. Not so great for some other things that we'll talk about in a little bit. That warm winter led to the earliest blooming bulb I have ever seen in my garden, which was a snowdrop that started blooming on February 3rd, which is incredibly early for my zone 5-6 garden. Yeah, southeastern Wisconsin. Hi, welcome if I have not explained where I am. Sorry about that. And that was in the bulb lawn that I had planted the previous fall. So in addition to the excitement of that bulb lawn starting to come to fruition, it was also just amazing to see it starting to bloom in February, which never in a million years would I have expected was going to happen. So spring was really an exciting time because that bulb lawn that, like I said, that I had planted in fall just started coming to life, and it was so much better than I could have expected. In fact, so good that, as you may recall, this fall I basically finished off the rest of the mound, or most of it, and probably more than doubled the size of that planting with spring bulbs. And I am really crossing my fingers that we get a great show again this spring. Even better, obviously, but we'll see. I have seen some critter activity over there going after bulbs, so I hope they've left some behind for me. Spring also was when we got, a very early spring, late winter was when we started getting rain. And it just rained and rained and rained and rained. And we more than made up with the moisture that we missed in snow with rain later on. So as we got into the gardening season, the garden came alive quicker than I have ever seen it happen. And it wasn't because of warmth, because it wasn't that warm, but there was so much moisture. Plants were so happy, and they just put out the most amazing foliage. In fact, I did a garden tour where I showed off the size of some of the hostas in this garden. But there were other plants that just were so happy about all the wet weather and the moisture when they were starting to grow. The clematis, one of the best years ever that I've had for clematis. They just kept blooming and blooming and blooming. There was a whole bunch of other plants that just absolutely thrived. Plants were growing taller and faster than I have ever seen them grow in this garden, which was a really interesting moment for me because I think it pointed out that many of the plants in my garden don't get as much water as they would really like. However, my caveat to that is that rain makes plants grow differently than just water from your well. So it's not exactly like an easy swap where I could just go add X inches of water from the hose and make up for all that rainfall that we had. But it really proved to me that plants in this garden really wanted more water to perform really well than they had been receiving, which was kind of an interesting learning moment for me. But then the rain stopped, and when the rain stopped, the rain just stopped. And suddenly we found ourselves going into like record-setting rainfall into drought category for much of the rest of the summer. One of the things I told you that all this mild winter brought a few negative things. At least in my opinion, I'm correlating these two things. And that was a much increased presence of deer and rabbits and a large increased presence of insects, and I would say more of the bad kind of insects than the good kind of insects. It was a really challenging year in terms of keeping things from eating plants. I think because the winter was so mild, some of the natural thinning of the herd that happens with deer and rabbits did not occur. I think probably because there was so much lush foliage around, a lot of newborn deer and rabbits probably thrived quite well. I think a lot of the things that nature sort of takes care of in the background didn't happen because the population was generally extraordinarily happy. Also bugs. So obviously with all that rain, we had so many slugs. And one of the things I've learned with slugs is that if you don't get on top of them very, very early, it's almost impossible to stop it. If you wait till you start seeing significant damage, it's really hard to get on top of that problem. And there were other bugs too. I just had a lot of bug issues. And I think a lot of that goes to a lot of really great foliage for these things to eat. I think it goes to a lot of the rain. I think it was just a winter in which a lot of insects that might have died didn't. And it was just kind of one of those years. So overall, I found it to be quite a challenging gardening year. Now, one of the high points in the garden for the year was the containers. In general, I was really happy with the containers this year, with a few exceptions, notably the urn in the middle of the patio garden, which was a design that just didn't come together for me the way I had hoped. I planted Amelanthus in the middle, which is a non-hardy perennial. I think it's only hardy to zone 8. I bought it from Digging Dog and ordered it and got it very, very early in the year and grew it on before I planted it out, but I was expecting it to grow much faster. And so it only got to be about maybe 18 inches in the pot all throughout summer, which was really not the big statement that I was looking for in that pot. Meanwhile, there were some other things that did very well and then some other things that did terribly, and the whole combination just kind of fell flat. Also, admitting it right here, I put too many different plants in that pot. This is a lesson I just need to learn repeatedly. And I don't think I'll ever remember it. I think I'll just have to, every couple of years, have to be reminded that that doesn't work and you need to limit your palette a little bit, grow the same number of plants, but of fewer varieties, and you get a much better show. But other containers were fabulous. I put a banana, a new banana, in addition to the old banana that's been kicking around for a while. I put that back into the giant pot by the front door, which is a 3x3 teak planter that is a stunning planter and huge and needs huge presence in that area. And I couldn't have been happier. That banana was living its best. And when I say banana, it's not really a banana. It's Ensete Morali, or Ensete vetricosum Morali, red Abyssinian banana. So not a banana, it's an ornamental banana. Anyway, it just thrived over there. Meanwhile, I still had banana number 1, which I continued to plant in the garden in the same place where it had been the year before because I decided I really like having a banana in that area. Much of the rest of the gardening year really was focused on refining and improving spaces around the yard. Spaces that either didn't have enough plants in them, had plants that didn't work, or I had just never really gotten to. One of the things I had to do early on, and I didn't end up making a video about this, I actually filmed the video and never edited it. And now I'm not even sure if I could still find the footage if I tried. But the garden right on the north side of the house, that's kind of is a little peninsula sort of that sticks out by the bird feeder. In spring I went in there and found about 75% of the plants did not make it, and most of them had no roots left. And my first thought was that I was dealing with voles. I have no reason to think voles wouldn't be in this garden, except that I haven't found a lot of damage from them, knock on wood. I do see them dead on the road though, so I know they're around here. So I thought it was voles because there was nothing left of the roots. But then there was some other things that there was plants I would have expected voles to go after that they didn't. And I started looking around and I realized that while I've known that I have invasive jumping worms on this property, that particular garden where I had some soil brought in, so I'm pretty sure that's where an additional amount of them came from. That particular part of the garden was absolutely infested with them. And I confirmed that by doing what is called a mustard pour. You can Google this. A mustard pour is not a way to get rid of invasive worms, or any worms for that matter, because it's a non-selective situation. It is a way to judge what the size of your population of them is. And what it is there's a mixture you do, and you take dry mustard and you mix it in with a gallon of water, shake it up really good, and then you slowly pour it onto an area. And I poured an area, if I recall, it was about 3 feet, like probably 9 feet square, because I think I did like 3 feet in each direction. And then within seconds, worms will come to the surface, because what it is an irritant. So all these worms come to the surface, and these are juvenile worms because I did this early in the season. And I picked up more than 100 juvenile jumping worms in about 50 seconds. So I knew I had a big problem over there. So I had to replant that area with a lot of new plants, and I'm really focused on trying to get plants that can grow in the presence of jumping worms, because I will never be rid of them. This is not something that I can ever eradicate. There are things I might be able to do to hopefully decrease the size of the population, and I'll be working on those this coming year. But once you have them, I don't think there's any way probably to be rid of them that we know of at this point. And so a lot of the research is starting to focus on what plants will do well with them. And those are plants that are either very deeply rooted or that have quite thick, fleshy roots. Anything with a hairy root was just decimated by these things. But the dahlias that I put in that bed did absolutely fine, because no jumping worm is going to mess around with a big old tuberous dahlia root. Also baptisia, things with a big old taproot. Invasive jumping worms live on the top 4 to 6 inches of the soil. So any roots below that, they're never going to touch. Also, it's kind of important to buy slightly more mature plants. So everything I put in that garden was at least a gallon size or bigger. And that just was what I had to do for that garden. So that's where it started. And then I did redo some areas. Actually, that was later in the summer, where I redid a few areas. I added a little something to a little woodland area that's really been a problem for a while. I added something on the sort of east side of our property, which was kind of a mishmash. Oh, what it was this tilt-a-whirl hosta that I had gotten at a plant sale, decades ago, and had divided over the years. And I liked that hosta quite a bit, but it was an absolute slug magnet. And some are much more slug resistant. This wasn't one of them. So it always looked terrible by the end of the season. So I finally ripped those out and planted something new there. And that felt great. It was really, really nice to go back and attend to areas that I've been meaning to address in some way, and sort of force myself to deal with the problem instead of just, I'll have to deal with that at some point when I find the right plant for that. When it comes to dealing with problem areas, I also worked on eradicating the lily of the valley that has been taking over certain parts of the shade garden on the west side of the house. That's obviously an ongoing project. I certainly didn't get those out. And actually, the video that I made on that, in which I worked on that over the course of, I think, 3 days, was the last time. I said I was going to continue. I didn't do any more of that. I was so sick of digging that stuff out. So that will continue, but I did get in there and replant some things in there. So that part of the gardening year, that was kind of later in the year for the most part, felt really, really good to me to do something about areas that had been bugging me for a while. Now, the one big project I did have actually didn't happen here this year. So I had a friend who became a client who I did a garden design for, and they live right on the shore of Lake Michigan in this beautiful mid-century modern house. And they wanted some gardens to look out from the house and the patio out at right along, they have kind of a rock wall right by the lake. So instead of just having grass leading to beach, They wanted sort of a transition thing there. And we planted a garden, and I am really, really, really proud of that design. I think it worked out extraordinarily well. We did a lot of natives in there. We did a lot of grasses. The whole idea was something very free-flowing. One of the things she had said was that a neighbor of theirs had a garden in a similar area, but they had knockout roses and black-eyed Susans and maybe some agastache in there, but lots of knockout roses. And they felt that there was a formality to that they didn't care to have in that garden. So I never did get you guys back for a tour later in the year of that garden, but it grew in so well. In fact, it grew in so well that I took a lot of stock of what needs to happen in this garden, because her plants grew way better than my plants have for a long time. Part of that is that we amended the soil appropriately. We actually had to amend it a couple of times because there's a bit of a snafu with the soil delivery. And everything had been planted properly, and obviously she was very attentive with watering and weeding. So made me take stock of a few things in my own garden. It was good for me to do that project because that scratched that itch that I always have to make a new garden. And, you know, I'm cautious with making new gardens around my property because I am on the cusp of not being able to manage what is happening here. Maybe I'm beyond the cusp, to be honest. So I'm very cognizant about, like, you know, take care of what you have before you add more. And so that really was almost therapeutic for me. Fun to do that, and very fun for me to do a project for someone else and incorporate someone else's desires. Actually, maybe a little easier than even designing your own space. And work with some really fun plants and be able to work in plants that I kind of would love to have in my garden. It was all around just a really excellent experience. So, and then we rolled into fall and the holidays. I did a couple of fall containers. I was very happy I did them. It made me feel good. It was fun to do, and it was fun to have something to look at. I would never change over all of my containers for fall, but it was nice to have a couple of them. And interestingly, our fall extended. It was so warm. We had such a mild fall that I got probably almost a full month more out of my summer containers than I normally would have. This crazy warm autumn meant that many of the summer containers were looking great well into November, which is just crazy. So actually the window box, for instance, went straight from summer to winter with like 2 days in between of an empty window box. It was something I have never experienced before. By the way, just a quick note, the window box was new this year. In the video where I planted that, I talked a little bit about it. What I got was a bigger window box, deeper. Had that custom made from Hooks and Lattice, who sent that to me, which was very nice of them. And it was great. It was great. I loved it. I think the plants did really well in it. I forget exactly how many inches I think it was only about 2 inches that I added to the depth, maybe a little more. It made such a difference in how many plants I could put in there, how well everything grew. It was pretty outstanding, actually. Anyway, window box went from summer to winter, which was just crazy. And one other note about summer containers that I didn't bring up was that this was the first year that I had done hanging baskets. Since maybe the first year we bought this house 22 years ago, when I bought hanging baskets at the garden center and stuck them on shepherd's crooks in the yard, and then invariably they'd die because there was no possible way to keep up with the watering requirements of those plants. Anyway, I added this trio of containers underneath one of the spruces, kind of along the path to the vegetable garden. And in my container review video, I mentioned that they were probably my favorites. They turned out so great. More than that, I had so much fun designing them. It was really fun. So I did 2 hanging baskets hanging from the tree, and then the third part of the trio was an old fire pit that I turned into a planter years ago, drilled holes in the bottom of it. And it was, I think, a great little moment. Totally inspired, by the way, by some of the plantings they do at Chanticleer, at least the design of the containers. I love containers. This will not come as a surprise to anybody who watches this channel regularly. I would have no limit to the containers that I have around the yard were it not for the money situation, which is that good big pots are not inexpensive and filling big pots is also not inexpensive. And then also, I mean, I think there is a limit to the amount of containers you can put on a property before things start looking very cluttered. Anyway, I enjoy them so much, and I'm glad I found a spot to sort of organically work some in. Also, it's the only place on the property where I have sort of true shade containers. And it is always fun to, have to stretch your gardening muscle a little bit and come up with something different and play around with different plants. I couldn't have been happier with how those worked out. The other new addition to the garden this year was the water bowl that I added on the west side of the house. And what I loved about, first of all, I think that solved a lot of issues in that area, which was feeling very busy to me. That's in a part of the garden that, this is another one of those parts of the garden that was very much thrown together as I was a beginner gardener. So that area was a little busy on the eye and a little lacking, honestly, in a focal point. And so that water bowl just created a spot for your eye to rest and a bit of a focal point in that part of the garden, a point of interest. I think that's what we needed, was a point of interest along that route there. I loved it. I loved how it looked. Yes, it's just still water. So, I did have to make sure I remembered to treat it with BT and clean it out. The BT prevents mosquito larvae from thriving there. Clean it out and then add my pond dye. Yeah, it's a little bit of work. I don't think it's any more work than a fountain is, because you got to make sure that you have a fountain topped up all the time. Also, I have mixed feelings about fountains in my own garden, and this was, I thought, a great way to work water in without having to worry about electrical and things like that. In this mixed gardening year, there were certainly some fails, and I would say most of those fails occurred in the vegetable garden. I had my biggest fail ever, colossal, complete fail with trying to grow sweet potatoes in the vegetable garden.
I can't believe it. Not a single sweet potato, not even a small sweet potato, not even really a sign that a sweet potato was thinking about growing in there, with the exception of some sort of thicker roots.
Now, so many of you left helpful comments. I have tried growing so many weird plants over the years, particularly in the vegetable garden, and generally had a great deal of success with them. I think I went into sweet potatoes overconfident. So I had watched a couple of videos over the years from people, but I never dug into, I never did my own research on it. And I paid the price because I didn't get a single sweet potato. So big fail for me on that one. Also, the vegetable garden in general was not great this year. But I went into the year thinking that this was going to be the year of the vegetable garden. Because I didn't have my focus on one big project, I thought I'm going to have all this time to really do succession planting and really focus on the vegetable garden and be out there and replanting things and making the most use of the space. And I would say that was a mixed bag on my success with that. So what will 2025 bring to this yard? Well, first of all, I mentioned earlier how this garden that I had designed for a friend that just absolutely thrived really was a good wake-up call for me about how well plants should be growing. And I started thinking about what was behind that. And 10 years ago, when I was really getting, maybe more than that, but somewhere in there, when I was really getting into this garden, I was really felt like I had learned so much about gardening and I was really focused on doing all the right things. Every other year, I would bring in a very big load of compost and I would top dress the entire garden in 2 to 3 inches of compost. And first of all, the garden was much smaller then, so that was actually a much more reasonable task. But the garden thrived. I also was very good about mulching back then. If you watch this channel a lot, you probably know that I detest mulching. I just hate it. So this year, I have sort of resigned myself to focusing on soil health. which is something I feel that I have been neglecting for too long. Now, all that work I did has served me well and still serves me well, but this soil could be much better. We also have the jumping worm issue, which has degraded the soil quicker than it would have. But after those years of amending the soil, I was getting soil test results back that showed I actually had too much organic matter in the soil. So I sort of stepped back a little. I feel like probably I shouldn't have done that. I think I should have not worried about how much organic matter was in the soil, even if the soil test said it was a little high. I plant my gardens extremely intensively. I also don't fertilize perennial gardens. I will spot fertilize certain plants, hydrangeas, clematis, things like that, or something that clearly needs a little help. But generally speaking, I don't fertilize stuff. So I just feel like I have gotten a little lax, and I feel like I've been sort of riding along on the coattails of Erin from a decade or more ago, who did all that hard work, and slacking off a little bit in that department. So compost this year is that we're bringing in compost. I was hoping to do some of this in fall. It did not happen. My hope now is to bring in very early in spring and just get that done and checked off the list. Maybe find some help to do that. So that is on the agenda. I think my garden will be a better place for having done that. Also mulching. You know that I don't care for mulching. The only kinds of mulch I have really used, at least in recent history, is arborist wood chips, which I always have some around. Broken down arborist wood chips, because sometimes I'll take the ones that are in the path and use that as a mulch and then put down fresh chips in the paths. And sometimes I use pine bark fines in the areas close to the house because it's a very nice looking mulch. Breaks down in a season easily. So, but last year I tried out pine straw mulch because I found a supplier for pine straw mulch, which is not something we can find easily here in the Midwest. It's very much a southern thing, and maybe eastern thing, but difficult to find here. I have found a supplier who I can get pine straw mulch from. I tried it out in a couple of beds last year. It was an absolute joy to work with. I happen to love the look of it, and hopefully I will be mulching with that all over the place. So that is Erin's attempt at undoing some of the laziness. Honestly, it's lazy. It comes down to laziness. It comes down to those things. Laying down compost and mulching, that's just elbow grease, hard work type stuff. And I think I got lazy. So no more lazy Erin. If you've seen some of my more recent garden strolls, you'll know that we had a tree taken down on the west side of the house, which has opened up a nice area over there, and we are going to be putting some trees in there, and I have a few other places that I'm going to be adding some trees. I'm just really into the structure, and I feel like even though we are very lucky to have a mature property with lots of mature trees on it, there are opportunities to add more structure to this garden. I'm all for it. And also I have that itch to add another garden. So that might happen. We'll see. I have some ideas of what that could be. It would be low maintenance garden. I think the days of adding high maintenance gardens to this property are long over for me. So any new gardens that get added will be relying heavily on trees and shrubs and any very easy care perennials. And that would be it. Much like I did when we did the new border garden between us and the neighbor, really focused on just trees and shrubs. And I have since put in just a handful of ground cover perennials there, but nothing that requires maintenance, really. So that is a little sneak peek at 2025. When I look back at the gardening year of 2024, I think I will remember it as sort of unremarkable. Good points, bad points, nothing fabulous, nothing terrible, not like the year when I created a whole new garden and then we got a flood and every bit of the 20 yards of soil washed into Lake Michigan. That was not great. So yeah, just kind of an unremarkable year for me. And especially because I didn't do any big projects here. While it was nice to take that break, and I think my garden is better for it because I think in 2024 I spent more time analyzing my garden and knowing what I could do better and fixing many of those things. I think my garden will be better going forward because I had that year. By the same token, I'm feeling the itch to really get in there and change a few things up. So thank you all for being a part of this channel this year. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, that'd be a great way to start the new year. And I'd love to hear more about how your gardening year went. Good, bad, indifferent. I think it's always helpful to just spend a little bit of time looking back before we definitely leap into looking forward. I can't wait to share the garden with you in 2025. We will see you soon. Have a great day in your garden.